Today we are going to talk about the logic of interest groups, why these interest groups exist, and how they work. So we should start with a definition of an interest group. Interest groups are organized collections of individuals or entities that work together to influence government policies in ways that benefit their members or the causes they champion. We might be able to talk about the difference between organized and diffuse interest. Organized interests work together for a common purpose and have structure and have leadership and have funding. Diffuse interest can be any group of people who believe anything, but they might just not interact or have any way of accessing the government. Sometimes you hear interest groups referred to as pressure groups or lobby groups. These are sort of more of a negative connotation. They represent almost any interest you've heard of has an interest group that is pushing the fact that you've heard them. Businesses, labor unions, environmental advocates, civil rights organizations, and really many, many others. So maybe here we should look a little bit at some political science theory. There's several different ways to look at interest groups and how they interact with the political community, with the decision-making process of government. In this class, oftentimes we look at rational choice theory. And if you remember, we talked about interest groups when we talked about the chicken game. The rational decision to be a free rider is something that any interest group needs to be concerned about. You really want an interest group to achieve your goals without having to participate yourself. Think of a protest where the police arrest everyone. Do you want to be arrested, or do you want whatever advantage that protest gained for your group without being arrested? And so interest groups have to overcome the free rider problem, because if too many people decide not to participate, then the interest group is going to fail to achieve its goals. People also look at interest groups in terms of just how the interest group community works versus in achieving the goals of their groups for government. Now, many people look at interest groups as being a servant of an elite class. Elites, after all, have the money to support interest groups. Now, it's possible that these elites have chosen to take on your cause, and that's wonderful for you. But you should be concerned a little bit that maybe they're trying to co-opt your cause. After all the time hear people say, no one should be a billionaire. And then you see organizations saying no one should be a billionaire. But then you think, aren't there billionaires who are funding this organization? Do you think that the billionaire who's funding that organization is doing it so that they'll stop being a billionaire? Or are they doing it to make sure that this group doesn't push too far too fast? The elite theory of interest groups says that organized interests work to reinforce existing power, and they facilitate access to decision makers by the elite and lock out the other groups. Several people have written on this in the past. Pluralist theory, on the other hand, is a little bit more optimistic. It suggests that interest groups overlap and have memberships that correspond with the memberships of political parties, other groups, that they work together in unison to achieve goals, and that there's interest groups representing everyone at the table, and therefore government is able to know what all of the different groups really want and really need and work out compromises between them. So what do interest groups do? Well, the primary purpose of interest groups is lobbying. The first goal is access, but the purpose of access is influence. Lobbying can be defined as a process of trying to persuade government officials, especially legislators, to support or oppose specific laws or regulations. The structure of American government provides many access points. However, every decision maker is not equally influential. In 2025, it's much more useful to have the ear of Donald Trump's inner circle uh, than most US senators. You might be great, for instance, to be best friends with AOC or with Bernie Sanders. But people are out there yelling and complaining because they don't have the ability to just go and talk to the president and persuade him. The people who carry out this work are called lobbyists, and lobbyists can be professionals or they might be dedicated members of the group themselves. Sometimes you'll have somebody who's just an influential business person or a famous athlete or somebody who is able to gain access and is not looking to make money for themselves, or at least not as part of a salary by an interest group. And what they want is to change the policy. And lobbyists rely on a mix of strategies, and we divide them into two main categories: insider tactics and outsider tactics. And we'll talk a little bit more about these here coming up. Sometimes the most powerful interests move back and forth between government and the private sector. Sometimes the most powerful interests are people who just have been supporters of the political leaders who have secured office. Uh, I created this in AI. This isn't actually Elon Musk and Donald Trump playing chess in outer space, but it looks a little like it could be real. Insider tactics are one of the most effective ways that interest groups influence government. After all, this is where you have access and you're talking to the people you know, and you're talking to the people who want to listen to you. Insider tactics are all about direct access to the decision makers. This could be meeting one-on-one with legislators or their staff. This could be providing data, research, or expert testimony. This could be about testifying at legislative hearings. Remember, many of the members of Congress have people on their staff who come directly from interest groups, and they therefore have a pipeline where uh, they promote the interest to the member of Congress just through their working relationship. They work best for groups that already have connections. Trying to knock on the door and say, you don't know me, but this is what I'm trying to do to influence you, is just not going to be effective. And they're often best for those groups that are already very powerful. This is what we picture when we think about the back room and the shady deal. Um, you think about groups like think tanks, for instance, and what they really are designed to do is to provide the intellectual heft to the politician who, maybe doesn't know an awful lot about a topic, but certainly cares about it. And they care about it because the people who give them money care about it. Nobody wants to use outsider tactics. If you're using outsider tactics, it's because you do not have access. After all, the people who are already in power are often quite annoyed if you're engaged in some of these activities. And it's just, much more pleasant to be talking to people who have influence rather than to be standing on the outside yelling. Outsider tactics focus on influencing policymakers by rallying public support. This is when the policymaker says no, then you say, really? Look at how angry everyone is. This could mean organizing protests, launching media campaigns, or using grassroots lobbying. And so you say, what is grassroots lobbying? Uh, it is when interest groups mobilize their members or even the broader public to contact elected officials and voice their stance on an issue. People used to talk about how it was much more effective rather than showing that you have many, many members to have those members individually write letters to members of Congress. Now, I suppose you would send emails or you would call the switchboard. Social media is probably very effective. If you've ever seen a post from a politician where they claim something and then you send a message back and you say, well, that's not what it's like in my hometown. You're engaged in outsider tactics, especially if you've been influenced by an interest group to do this. Grassroots lobbying in the era of social media is in some ways more effective because you can get more people out and speaking on something. However, I think there's also been a discounting as the impression that it's easy to get a mob together now, that it's become less influential. So, how do interest groups maintain membership? How do they get them mobilized to act? Interest groups don't just rely on good intentions. After all, we have this collective action problem that we're concerned with. So, to get it, they offer incentives to their members. Uh, maybe sushi and an opportunity to meet space aliens. Selective incentives are exclusive perks for members only. Think discounts on services, access to special events, or a subscription to a group newsletter. These tangible benefits sweeten the deal for joining and staying involved. AARP, the American Association of Retired Persons, one of the great perks they offer is Medicare supplementary insurance. They're actually, in many ways, they're an insurance company that advocates more than they're even an advocacy group that has an insurance company. There's also moral incentives, though. You need to appeal to someone's values. If someone greatly opposes a policy, they're not going to say, well, there's a coupon at the back of the newsletter. These tap into your sense of justice or a desire to support a worthy cause. And I would say that in most respects, it's the moral incentive that causes you to be interested. And it's the selective incentive that perhaps pushes people over the top rather than just sort of paying attention to what the interest group does to actually sign your name on the dotted line to be a full member. In my youth, there was a particularly powerful uh, public interest lobbying ad that was against pollution, and it showed a Native American man, and he's looking out at all of the pollution. And the idea was, that I think they were trying to capture at the time, was that we were losing our American heritage by uh, by destroying the environment. Now, of course, 50 years later, this is a much more fraught ad, right? Because, the connotation of utilizing the Native American to represent an image rather than, just naturally that perhaps many Native Americans might be opposed to pollution, and maybe some others are seeing some advantage to growing the economy and all the rest. That same controversies through society as a whole. So the stereotype might be controversial, but it was very effective at bringing attention to the problem of pollution. And so this was part of a public interest lobby. The the sand and the grasslands and such, they don't have a lot of money. Uh, but people who were advocating on behalf of the environment, they did have a lot of money, and so causing they were advocating on behalf of the environment. So there's many examples of this kind of lobbying, but it's when an interest group is less concerned about their personal well-being than on the economic benefit that it provides them. And sometimes if you look real deep, you see that there's a lot of money behind these groups that do have advantage, who can gain advantage. You'll see quite often, for instance, very wealthy people out west will buy huge tracts of land. They'll put their fancy mansion on one of, on near a road on that land. And then so that they don't have to pay taxes on 100 acres, they'll donate 80 of those acres to you know to the land management people so that it can never be developed. But it's kind of their land. It's like, I'll pay for my house, but not for my view. So, if you look closely, sometimes it's not all public interest, but that's the idea behind this group of lobbying, this categorization of lobbying. One way that interest groups influence politicians, maybe I guess we'd say this is in addition to the insider or outsider tactics, or we could say that this is a type of influence of it's a tool for either, is the Political Action Committee, sometimes called PACs. PACs try to shape who makes the decisions by getting involved in elections. The best way to use insider tactics is to be able to say, remember when we got you elected. They're set up by interest groups to raise and spend money to support or oppose political candidates. If campaign money is uncoordinated, right? We've had some Supreme Court cases lately that say if the campaign money is uncoordinated with campaigns, uh, the ability to spend is virtually unlimited. And in the internet era, these groups are able to expand their reach by using social media. The amazing thing is, right, if you get 10, 15,000 people on your list and you send them social media, then all of those people take those memes and they post them, and you get to multiply your influence. Every time you see a meme that's all professional looking and it says something about, someone has their head in their hands and they're all upset because, Senator this or President that have advocated a policy that's destroying people like us. It's because it was created by someone and then it was sent out to the world. Yeah, I suppose every so often there's just some guy and he comes up with a social media campaign. But quite often, the people who are doing this to make money on behalf of interest groups. Interest groups don't exist in a vacuum. In fact, oftentimes we talk about interest groups as being part of a community that is related to a particular policy area. In the US, competition between groups, the regular constitutional checks and balances, the bureaucracy, federalism, and budget constraints often lead to policy gridlock or a significant difficulty in achieving significant social and political change. In fact, sometimes it seems like nothing important can be passed. We live in a world where Congress seldom successfully even creates a budget in a given year. Now, one of the things about our system that makes political and social change very difficult is that people do not maintain their level of interest across time. Anthony Downs, a great political scientist, way back in the 1950s, wrote of the difficulty of maintaining mobilization for policy change because change takes time, while interest in an issue tends to wane over time. And so interest groups help with this by helping to maintain pressure. They keep their list. These are the list of people we can get interested again if you guys keep holding out on us. But at the same time, you'll have people who are willing to rally and protest and do all sorts of things in the short term, but over time, nah, I've got other things to do. I have a life to live. In fact, I even want to just sometimes ignore reality and try to be happy. Downs's observation has come to be called Downsian mobilization. The idea that at first there's a focusing event that brings everybody to pay attention, and then as time goes on, more and more people fall away as they go back to whatever it is they do, and there's a race. Can we get something done in the time that we have before the mobilization ends? Interest groups can often be the spokesman for a broader social movement. Social movements are collective actions to drive social and political change, like the civil rights movement or the push for marriage equality. The civil rights movement, we can think of groups, the NAACP, for instance, the Urban League. There are interest groups, the Council on Racial Equality. The social movement was vast and had many different views and goals and objectives, whereas the interest groups served those broader goals and objectives, but each had their own funding, their own their own focus. Social movements, though, rely heavily on the mass public. And so, since their interest is much more volatile, uh, interest groups tend to sometimes outlive the social movements that they were part of, or to end up being a torchbearer for a social movement that's become a little bit more moribund over time.